welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Amy Stevens. I'm Chief Executive Gifted. We are fundraising consultants working with charities all across the sector, from the early stages of fundraising, so planning, campaigns, testing feasibility, to actually the hands-on fundraising themselves. This is one of our mini series of webinars where we're bringing in other specialists who we work with. So I'm delighted to have Sam and Frankie here with me today from The Ripple Effect. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hello. The Ripple Effect is a comms, insight, PR and production agency, but you guys explain a bit more about for yourselves what it is you do before we get started.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So yeah, we're a relatively newly formed purpose-led agency looking to make waves with brand and to create some media content for them. The idea behind us is that we wanted to work with brands and organizations that do a little bit more than just initially sort of selling a product or a service. We wanted to see and really help maximize the impact that they can make on the community that they're sort of within and the sort of wider industry as a whole. So we've taken a particular interest in working with charities, working on fundraising and the like. We have a passion around ESG initiatives and CSR. And yeah, we're really excited to be in this space and to be working with Amy on this.
Fantastic, thank you. So today we're talking about charity media appeals, something that is really kind of a new thing for me over the last couple of years. And I've worked with Sam and Frankie on a couple of different projects now and learned so much. So we're going to talk through, first of all, from my perspective in terms of fundraising and how as fundraisers we navigate that. And then obviously from the perspective of the ripple effect in terms of how do agencies work with and support charities as we do these kind of appeals. So to kick us off, just thinking about fundraising and publicity, one of our Gifted warnings for charities is, don't think you can just launch a public appeal to the community and your £3 million or whatever it is you're looking to raise will come rolling in. Because yes, we see these big campaigns which raise tens of millions of pounds in the press, but actually they are so few and far between. Charity media appeals shouldn't be about replacing your ordinary fundraising and your major gifts and all the other work you do behind the scenes. It's a certain phase of fundraising. So just to reiterate that. So thinking about things that we should think about. So your charity or your campaign, you're thinking about, do we need a media appeal? What do you need to do in your planning? So first of all, think, are you at the right stage in your fundraising? We do not want to launch media appeals at the start of a £5 million campaign. They are the finisher. They are the final push. They are, come on, let's get behind this and reach this target. So think about, are you at your right stage in the fundraising? Don't go too early with those campaigns. You do not want to create donor fatigue. When we hear the same old story banging on and on and on, you think, have these guys not raised the money yet? Like they've been asking me for the last 2 years. Very different to something like Cancer Research UK, for example, one of the big boys. They're constantly out there raising money, but we know they constantly need to raise money. But if you're doing a specific campaign, going too early just creates that fatigue. And you also risk those larger gifts. So by launching a community appeal before you have done the face-to-face major donor asks, you do risk that person who perhaps could have given you £100,000 if cultivated and asked properly, giving you £1,000 through an online giving system or what have you. So think about your timing again, don't go too early. In terms of celebrities, now celebrities can be hugely useful, but don't just rely on a celebrity. And the guys are going to talk a lot more about ambassadors and celebrities when I hand over to them. But they don't always raise the money that you hope they will. So getting a celebrity on board doesn't necessarily mean you will raise money. Critical is allow enough time to plan. These kind of appeals, we're going to talk about the need to be agile and what have you, but the planning and actually the prep that you as a charity need to do to support whoever you appoint to help you with it is really critical, and you don't want to go off at these things, you know, at the wrong angle. Plan it properly. And from my experience, use a specialist. So as I said, I've worked with Sam and Frankie previously, and I learned so much. You know, as fundraisers, we're often expected to be jack of all trades, and we're not. You know, we're specialists in certain areas, and this was not my specialism at all. So using external support for me was super helpful. So next, how do you get started? The first thing for me is the importance of a clear brief. And that doesn't matter what specialist you're appointing, you should always be giving a clear brief, but particularly in this sense, first of all, thinking about if you are planning a charity media appeal, what are your goals? What is the end game? What are you hoping to get out of this? Is it data acquisition? Are you looking to build you know, your database and those people you can contact and take along the donor pipeline? Is it money? Are you looking for gifts, purely for gifts for a certain campaign? And is it brand awareness? Do you have a new brand you want to get out there, etc.? It could be that it's a mixture of all three, and you know, that's also fine, but really critical you think about that. Second, what's your budget? Budget really important in helping whoever's going to support your campaign to plan that out. And
you can then take that celebrity away and book them interviews across print, online, broadcast, and yeah, just basically look at the person you're using, and don't just use the person for person's sake. Amy, are you back with us now?
Am I back?
You are.
Apologies, so my internet must have dipped out. The joys of webinars and Zoom and what have you. I do apologise, everybody. Where did you lose me, guys? Did you hear the importance of a clear brief or not?
Yeah, we got that there. I just started chatting about some celebrity side of stuff, but we'll let you go back to where you were.
Okay. I've lost you around budget, Amy, if you want to pick up that.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, just on the budget, you know, think about what it is that you want to spend on your media appeal. Your consultants will help you with that and judge what you need to spend to achieve certain goals. And again, the guys are going to talk a bit more about budget as we go on. Do you have any no-go areas for press? Really important. You know, people need to know about that if they're supporting a PR campaign with you, that there are things that actually you don't want to talk about, not because your organisation's got any skeletons, but just because it can be contentious or what have you. And then think about your celebrity involvement. Is that an option for you? You know, it works well for some causes and not for others. And actually your in-house team can be fantastic. And again, we're going to touch on that in the coming slides. So an example here from my perspective, the Kennel Club Charitable Trust is one of our clients. Last Christmas, we ran a Christmas campaign with a matched giving element. So we were lucky enough to have a donor match pound for pound, which was fantastic. We had a wonderful little video of Izzy, the Jack Russell, telling the story of Christmas and how dogs are so involved in Christmas. And we had Ricky Wilson of the Kaiser Chiefs, who is a massive dog lover, do a lot of press interviews for us, which was brilliant. So we were clear about our goals, and actually on that case, it was a mixture of all three. It was brand awareness, it was gifts, money for the campaign, and it was data acquisition as a relatively new charity in the public eye, building a supporter base. And we saw from that, we had a massive impact. Yes, we raised 66,000, but actually we also had a significant increase in socials. I think it was about 40%, Sam, I think, wasn't it? We increased social following. Data acquisition was huge. We had thousands of new donors who are now being communicated with. And really critically, we had a new major donor. So through a Sky News interview, this individual saw the work we were doing, was really touched, and fantastic individual has now joined the charity and having a huge impact on the work of the charity. So Sam's going to talk a bit later about how we measure the success of these campaigns, but sometimes there's nuances because there's the actual campaign itself, but there's those knock-on effects, such as this major donor who is now, you know, inputting hundreds of thousands of pounds into the charity, which is fantastic. So the key challenges from my perspective, and things that I hadn't necessarily anticipated. So the first thing for me was in terms of press releases. So we all think we can write a press release, I can write and that's fine. But actually what I learned was they need to be so different for different audiences and different media outlets. And again, that's where the skill of using specialists comes in. Contacts at major news outlets, trying to get an interview on Sky News, I wouldn't have had a clue how to do that really, other than trying to Google and see if I could get through to a news desk. Really important, the ever-changing schedules of major news outlets. So again, what I've learned is that the media kind of environment is quite volatile. We had, again, with the Kennel Club, big appeal for Ukraine, for dog owners in Ukraine. And we had a feature booked for, gosh, Sam, how many times did you have to move it? 6 times, maybe?
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Probably, wasn't it? Because a news story came in or something about Partygate or something happening with the war, and we had to be flexible and move. And, that's something to think about and a learning point for me. Getting the message right as well, what will sell and what won't. And being flexible with that. So again, with our Christmas campaign, it was going relatively well, but we weren't quite getting the traction we thought we would initially. So we went to our kind of second message, and it went crazy. And it was just the right message at the right time. So it's that kind of flexibility. And I didn't have the skills to do that myself. So it was great for me to have a team on board to help me with it. So I will pass over now to Sam and to Frankie to talk about this from their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I don't want to teach anyone to suck eggs as such. I'm sure everyone knows how to put a brief together. But, a couple of key points here that we thought were worth sort of discussing in a bit more detail and really, really help when it comes to sort of further building out a media strategy and understanding exactly what are the sort of wants and the needs of the campaign. It helps us better communicate with you. It helps us better communicate with media, and it just makes for, a much smoother process overall. So, firstly, we're talking about what are the most important points of narrative. From a charity perspective, there's so much that you want to communicate in each and every interview you do. You want to talk about everything exciting that's going on, but we have to consider what these main points are, so that it's easy to digest from a sort of general consumer perspective, and this brings us on to sort of the takeaway messages as well. What do you want to provide to them, and what do you want them to understand and them to go and do once they've seen your amazing interview, your amazing piece of coverage? So some important points to consider. The other thing is, in terms of the urgency, as Amy was saying, the media environment changes all the time. So we need to convince journalists that they need to cover this now, as opposed to when it suits them in 2 months' time, in 2 weeks' time. There needs to be a sort of call to action that's only relevant for a sort of finite period of time. Who is my audience? I think with some charity appeals, it's easy to think that they appeal to the masses, and they likely do, but the masses doesn't necessarily translate into who will be, the people who donate to your campaign, or the people who are touched enough to actually go on and do something about it. So actually figuring out who those sample of people are will really help you in detailing your media strategy and getting the maximum impact from that. What are we asking the audience? Do you want them to know more about your own sort of charity or brand? Do you want to give them a message that you want them to consider for a period of time? Is it a donation request? It needs to be clear what the next step is from them. And then we need to consider any potential barriers to that. So if you're asking them to make a donation to a cause, how easy is it for them to make that donation? Is it a case of them picking up the phone? Is it a hotline? Is it a microsite that they need to access? And are there going to be any difficulties with that microsite? If, for example, the timeline didn't line up with your campaign, or if, in an ideal scenario, if it was so busy that the traffic was almost too much for it to handle. We just need to consider any of these potential challenges and how we would overcome them. And then the final point here is, why support this over something else? We're all extremely passionate about the causes that we stand for and that we support, but there's so many of them out there. So it comes down to, again, the urgency, but also, what is the sort of unique selling point at this period in time?
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that, the 2 points for me that stand out are the kind of messaging. So as fundraisers, we think the project we are working on is the most important thing because we are so focused on it and we're so engaged on it. But actually, sometimes the press won't see it that way. And we need to think about how it's packaged really to sell to the press. And just those barriers there that Frankie mentioned. So, make sure that your online giving is running properly if that's where you're directing people to, and that you have the capacity to thank people properly afterwards, which we all know fundraising is hugely important. Also, just remembered, I forgot to say about the Q&A. Guys, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll pick all those up at the end of the presentation.
So the importance of insight, I've just touched on sort of 4 key ones here, and the sort of informing and educating piece is quite an important one. And I don't think it's just from a charity perspective. I think, it underlies a lot of PR activity, and whether it's about understanding your audience or creating a narrative to make it most appealing to them, these can be quite easy ways to do that. Additionally, from a breakdown perspective, you can get your sort of research to be geographically relevant to each area. We can make stories sort of more regionally specific or appear on a national level, sort of overarching Brit stories, etc. So there's lots of ways to slice and dice this information that can give you quite a few sort of narrative lines to work with. The top one that I've mentioned here is sort of internal insight. So what I mean by this is actually sort of data that you have from within the organization already. This is a really cost-effective way if you have an ability to mine your own sort of data, or there's someone who's able to sort of look into that on your behalf. And it could be that you have some really interesting stories within sort of internal trends that you've seen, and maybe you haven't used this from a sort of media perspective yet, but there could be a really interesting story to tell, so something to consider. External insight sourcing. So I've given the example here of the sort of Freedom of Information Act, but if you wanted to sort of find out information from the NHS or a government body about, how a particular council was performing on particular issues, or, the cost of, off the top of my head, foot care to the NHS, you can find out that information through the Freedom of Information Act. I don't think, and I would have to double check, that there's much of a cost aligned to it, but it is time consuming. And I think it takes quite a long time for this information to come back. So if you were thinking to build it into a timeline, I'd look into that ahead of time and probably, almost double the time that you're considering you're going to have for it, just because it can take so much longer. Consumer opinion polling. So this is like an online questionnaire survey that you can put out to the general public, or a more specific sort of version within that. But this is a great way to sort of pull out data lines. This is something that we use for the Kennel Club to find out from dog owners, about how their pets were very much looked after and how spoiled they were, whether they were getting gifts for Christmas, that sort of thing. And you can really put a figure to some really fun lines to work with. So, if it comes out that your dogs are getting more spent on them than your partners, for an example, it's quite a fun sort of light-hearted line to lead with, and can get you some quite nice sort of media traction. Market research, you will probably know quite a lot about already, but again, just to sort of further understand the demographic that you're looking to target, it really helps inform a media strategy, because once you know that the most likely people to donate to your cause are, 40 to 55-year-olds that actively listen to the BBC 3 times a week, it's probably within your interest to do a sort of BBC focus campaign, opposed to some other sort of stations where it's not going to reach the target audience. And whilst they might enjoy your content, it's probably not going to go much further than that. So yeah, it's an interesting place to start and to work from.
Yeah, cheers. I think like everything on this slide has kind of been touched on already, but I think you can kind of sum it up by saying that you should never try and make outlets fit your story. It's all around bespoke pitching, bespoke story building. I think if you want to have a really successful campaign, so for instance, the last few that we've worked on with Amy and with other charities, the outlets that have got like really, really good donations have been stuff like Sky News, Morning Live on BBC, and Times Radio. And we know that those people really love an expert, they really love someone from the brand who talks with passion. And they have been able to like garner really, really good, strong coverage there. But whereas like elsewhere on the BBC network, for instance, they'd love just a celebrity to chat to, or a psychologist, or a doctor. So you can make sure that it has national and local appeal to the outlets that you want from day one. With any brand or charity we work with, kind of work with you from day one to say, what is your like dream ABC target list, and how do we get there? And we kind of work down that list when we start pitching. And in terms of like reaching your target audience, almost every single one of these outlets will have some sort of data pack available. So you can look at, right, I really want my campaign to target 30 to 55-year-old women, right? Here are the outlets that are speaking to them directly. So here's what should be our priority. And in terms of how you're appealing to your target audience, it's literally just making sure it's interesting. I think the age-old saying is, can you imagine it being talked about down the pub? And like PR in general, you kind of live in the PR world and you think, so are people outside the PR world hearing this? But then every now and again, you hear a story that you've been working on, chatted about on the tube or down the pub or wherever it is. And those are the campaigns that really sing, and the ones that you really want to aim for. And yeah, as Amy touched on earlier, when you launch your campaign, just be nimble. It used to be that you could have a set launch date in mind, it'd all go well, you wrap it up, happy days. Now it's very much, there's a lot of stuff going on out there and it could change at any time. So it's being nimble. If you're working with a celebrity who's like really, really aligned with your ethos and completely the brand loves the charity or organization inside out, they're generally happier to just move a couple of times if they need to. So just consider that when you're looking at talent contracts as well. Yeah, this is the date I want. It could move a couple of weeks. And yeah, I touched on this earlier, but yeah, independent versus in-house for charity ambassadors. So Amy was mentioning, we were working with Ricky, and he was absolutely brilliant. He did Morning Live for us, did loads of regional BBCs, The Express, some other online titles. But it was Bill, the Reverend Bill King, who's the chief ambassador for the Kennel Club Charitable Trust. He was the one that really made the difference on that Sky News piece. And it's like Bill's passion just shines through every time you speak to him. And like, you know that, and yeah, an audience, it just comes across to them so well and so naturally. It's not forced. But I think if you're going to use someone internally, make sure that they are someone that is like involved heavily with the day-to-day running of it. You don't want someone that is just there to do that day and might not know certain questions because their passion doesn't shine through as much, and that has a knock on. But yeah, in terms of your celebrities, as I said, it doesn't, in terms of your ambassadors, even as I said, it doesn't have to be a celebrity. Like psychologists work amazingly for some stories, financial pros, educational professionals, case studies as well. Like if you've got a really emotive story, so take the Childhood Trust, who's one of our who's one of our pro bono partners. We use case studies as much as possible, and Frankie will come on to talk about this a bit later. But we use case studies as much as possible for them. And if you've got someone that every single person can relate to, the possibilities are endless with that.
Yeah, it was funny, wasn't it? So Ricky's presence on the KCCT, we got loads of brand coverage because everyone wanted to pick it up because he was talking about it. But in terms of money, like you say, it was Bill saying, I need your help, get behind this. So really interesting.
So this is just a case study example of a campaign that Sam and I worked on in the midst of lockdown. So yeah, this was a 2020 Run for Heroes campaign, and we worked with the founder, Olivia Strong, to do a lot of broadcast activity for her and some sort of media interviews more generally. But her campaign was a really simple concept. It literally was donate £5, nominate 5 people. Run 5K, donate £5, nominate 5 people. And that was it. It was very much a sort of social-led activity. And it was a really simple ask for people to do. And I think that really helped contribute to the viral quality of the campaign. And it actually got sort of organic celebrity traction. So I'm sure that they did, do some paid influencer content sort of here and there. But the viral element of it meant that they did get, quite a wide range of celebrities to get involved in the campaign, and everyone heard about it. I feel, whether it was because you actually got involved in it or because you were terrified that someone was going to nominate you to do it, everyone knew that it was going on. And this campaign ended up raising in excess of 7 million for the NHS charities COVID-19 appeal, which is obviously, a fantastic and outstanding amount of money.
Yeah, and then as I mentioned just now, the Childhood Trust, who we work with very frequently. So for this campaign, this guy Leo was used as our case study. He had 2 daughters, and all they wanted for Christmas was bikes. Our research showed that 38% of the kids and young people supported by the Childhood Trust and their charities, there's about 120 of them across London, just didn't think they were going to get a Christmas present that year. And the campaign did brilliantly. We got some great coverage for it, and it raised way over what they wanted. The 3.5 mil was in about 8 days, and it just kept flying after that as well. But through the interview on Times Radio, a couple of listeners got in touch immediately, and it was actually someone from Halfords, and they donated bikes to Leo's daughters. And then Kay Burley, she wanted to donate bikes, but they were already done, so she donated the cash sum. And then some Morning Live viewers as well got in touch to say, we want to do something. So outside of that 3.5 mil, Leo's 2 kids have now got 2 bikes, and they got a really nice load of cash and food for their Christmas present as well. So it's just a really positive impact story to show that actually, like, there is the money side of it and the funds that we want to raise, but actually there's the human impact that we've all got to celebrate as well as we do these things.
Yeah, it was such a brilliant case study as well, just a really sort of unique real life scenario that really sort of tugged people's heartstrings, and people could relate to it, particularly those of young children, parents of young children.
Yeah, exactly. We also just wanted to touch on TV advert targeting. And I know that probably scared now. Whenever anyone says TV advert, just like, well, no, that's unattainable. It's not for me. It's way out of reach. It's too expensive. But actually, we work with our partner called Sky Ad Smart, and they are absolutely brilliant. Their basically mission is to make sure that every brand and organization in the world is able to advertise on television, and they make their sponsorship packs really, really tiny, and they can work to literally any budget. So take, for instance, a £5,000 budget for the TV ad. You can, if you've got some stock footage to use, it literally requires some editing together, work with them to get it compliant and get it on TV. £5,000 will let you reach about 37,500 households and serve an advert to them multiple times. But what's really cool about it is, if you and I were watching exactly the same thing on Sky TV at exactly the same time tonight, the adverts that we'd be showing in the breaks would be completely different to each other. And that's because the card in your Skybox is linked to Nectar, Experian, lots of other different things, and basically looks at your spending habits to be able to build like an audience profile on you. So for our campaign, if we wanted to target dog owners between the ages of 30 to 50 who shopped in Waitrose twice a week, and on those visits bought 3 packs of treats, like, you can go as niche as you want, and it'll build this profile and only let you target these. And actually Sky adults have actually been proven to be over 65 times more likely to donate over £100. So yes, there's some really good numbers from them as well. It just means that we can engage with the most engaged and responsive audience possible as an additional add-on to any media campaign. It's just a really nice tactic to use.
Yeah, and I think charities, fundraisers out there, do not panic. We all initially think of GDPR. This is, there's no data compromising going on here. It's completely normal, everyday data that's being used as it is behind the scenes. So don't worry about that.
Challenges. So Amy touched on some of the ones that she felt earlier, and equally really interested to find out what the challenges you have faced and ways that you've overcome them. I think that would be really nice to know. But ones that we discussed were brand collaborations are a tricky one to get to come to fruition. And we all have big ambitions about the brands that we'd love to work with and how it can come together. But even the process of just getting on that brand's radar and identifying the right people to speak to, and then, getting their commitment is a really long, quite strenuous process. So we would recommend, if it's something you're interested in, definitely have a sort of ABC list. So you're not totally sort of stuck on one, but also just making sure that you can fit it into your timeline, and that it's important and it's a nice to have, but it's not necessarily central to your campaign activity, because you don't want to find yourself in a scenario where it hasn't worked out and you feel like the campaign sort of hasn't been successful in that regard. I think there's lots of other ways to see success in campaigns, and it's a nice to have, but shouldn't be essential unless you've got the time to really work at it. The education and expectations piece that we've mentioned are really around sort of communication, I guess, communication with your fundraising partner, communication with an agency, communication with a brand, just to make sure that everyone is sort of working harmoniously and everyone understands exactly how long things are going to take, what's required to get some of this sort of gold tier coverage, and making sure that we can sort of tick those off as a checklist to know that we have what we need to make them happen. And just sort of managing expectations of the process, the timeline, and making sure we're all sort of working towards a common goal. And yeah, working together really sort of covers that as well. Timelines, just making sure that you have the time that's necessary to complete each part of the project. And I guess also bringing in sort of flexibility there, just knowing that some things can change and the media landscape changes all the time, and any element of sort of flexibility that can be built into specific dates that we're working towards, any sort of time that's required to make sure that every element of the campaign is right prior to the launch, can only sort of help things reach their full potential.
I think that flexibility element's key, isn't it? So again, one of my learning points was I need 3 or 4 trustees or, charity reps on hand, because you can get a call at 6 o'clock the night prior to say, we need somebody to do a 10-minute interview on Sky News at 7:30 in the morning. And, you don't want to turn down those opportunities if they crop up. So having that flexibility and having team primed and ready, briefed to go when you need them is really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing on that, I think, is when working with celebrity talent and stuff as well, is at your contracting stage, just to make sure that you're sort of working in any flexibility that you think you might need. For example, sometimes with a broadcast day, they might want to commit to a sort of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. sort of morning, and actually you just don't know when the interviews are going to come in over the course of the day. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by getting them to commit to a timeline, and then, God forbid, all your interview requests come in for the latter part of the afternoon. So any flexibility around that, or potentially just trying to get them to commit to a number of interviews that they will commit to doing over the course of the campaign, as opposed to on a particular day, is a better workaround. Because then you're not in a position where you have to turn down opportunities that would be spot on for your campaign.
Yeah
absolutely. And then just quickly touching on measurement, I think that PR measurement has always been tricky. Like, you've got AVE, which is advertising value equivalent, which is a really outdated metric. Lots of people still use it, lots of people still love it. I personally don't. I think it's a really hard one to look at. Like, advertising value equivalent of a piece of coverage, for instance, say you got a piece of coverage in the Telegraph, or you got an advert in the Telegraph. If people don't pick up the Telegraph that day, like, they're not seeing the advert, so the coverage wasn't quite right and it didn't hit that mark. But I think what we should be considering instead is, was the sentiment positive? So did the coverage and the story you put out inspire your audience, and did it drive them to donate to the fundraising, and was the fundraising target surpassed? Has it built some brand recognition? The Kennel Club one did a really good job of building the social side of things as well. So kind of just setting up at the start, what are our targets from the brief, and then looking at that brief at the end and going tick tick tick, yeah, happy, we're all good. And then any little flourishes, like these case study things that you get with Leo, that are just little cherries on top, like Izzy the Jack Russell. I know that the KCCT has now got an ongoing partnership with her as well, and there's all these little bits and pieces that you might not have considered as aims, but actually just are above and beyond sort of pieces that make everything shine.
Absolutely. And I think, when as fundraisers we're building campaigns like this into budgets, trustees, senior leadership teams want to see, what we're going to get from this, what are the results. So really important, as Sam just said, map those out at the start and look against how you've performed against those. And there's so much learning as well. Some things go incredibly well, other things don't go as well as hoped, but that is the nature of the beast that I've learned so far anyway, that we can try and get things spot on, but actually some things do better than others, and it can be quite volatile, I guess, in that sense. Okay, we're going to move on to some questions. Thank you, guys. That was so insightful. Let's see if we've got any questions in Q&A. Please do pop them in there. None at the moment, but I have a question for you guys from a fundraising perspective. So, we're talking about lots of things there, media, adverts, etc. And I know within the charity sector, people, and on this webinar, will be thinking, crikey, what on earth is this going to cost me? So just reassure us that actually different budgets can still work on these kind of things.
Yeah, no, exactly. That is absolutely the case. I know this isn't particularly helpful, but we can work to pretty much any budget. I think that it depends on, of course, the scope of the project, what you want to go for, but you can work with us or any other partners, and people will advise you to say, right, if these are your aims, these are things that we recommend to get it right. And you can kind of even present it as sort of a shopping list sort of thing. So anytime that we send the proposal over, the TV advert is always something that we really think is going to be amazing, and it's going to be something that's going to be able to actively target people. But some people don't have budget for the TV adverts, so they might want to just do some press activity. They might want to just do some research to inform something and then build something later down the line. But yeah, the possibilities are endless, really, and we can work with you guys to advise. Good.
That's good to know. Good to know. Anything from your perspective to kind of ask me on that point of the fundraising side of things?
Yeah. So what consultancy do you offer an organisation before commencing and committing to a project?
So it varies greatly, to be honest. So we normally do kind of feasibility scoping work with clients with their project initially, which is obviously a contracted piece of work. But before we do anything, we will meet with a charity, understand exactly what they want to achieve, to understand really, can we help them? So we'll always have those initial pro bono conversations to map out, is this doable? Can we help you? And if so, then we would look to, supporting somebody on a contracted basis. But, we don't want to be working with charities and taking money from charities where we don't think there's a feasible project there, and guiding them to the right route initially is key for us, really.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a lot of worries as well about kind of these kind of campaigns, and I was nervous about it initially. So, worries, do we have the skill within a team to run a media campaign? Have we got the time? Because it is really time intensive, isn't it? And I think a critical one is charities particularly worry about negative press. As I said earlier, not because your organisation has any skeletons, but the press can, they pick up and run with what they want to run sometimes, don't they? How do you guys navigate that when you're working with charities?
So with organisations that are particularly worried, we always say that media training is obviously a really good place to start, to actually have those sessions and get people prepped for the interviews. So if they get a particularly tricky question, they kind of know where they're going to go with that answer already, and they know how to spin that potentially negative thing into a positive. When people are really worried about what a print or online journalist would put out, we'd always say that if you're confident you don't think you've got any skeletons, then get in front of it, get on TV or radio, and actually, like with TV and with broadcast media, live broadcast media, you control that message completely. Whereas like with a print or online piece, sometimes some titles will turn it, and that's the nature of the game. But there are other titles that would never really dream of doing something like that, especially for charities. I think with brands, like greenwashing, for instance, massive issue at the moment, and brands are getting ripped apart for it. But with charities, I think journalists tread a much finer line sort of thing, and they're much more light-footed around it and don't want to cause that offence so much. So it's a safer space for charities than brands at the moment. But there's definitely ways around it.
I think as well what you said earlier about not changing your narrative to meet that of a media outlet, and also to go as far as don't be prepared, don't be afraid to pull your story. We had that with a different client, didn't we, where it was actually going off completely different messaging to what we wanted, and we said no, we don't want to be part of that, we don't want to run it, it's wrong. Indeed. So don't be prepared to step away from something if it does go down a kind of wrong messaging route for you, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, because like a prestigious national is absolutely nothing if it's the wrong message and it's gonna harm you. So there's no shame in saying, you know what, no, we're going to part ways on this. It's all good to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, there's no more questions. Oh, hang on, we might have one here. Let's have a look. When you do a big fundraising appeal, are you seeing a big uplift in demands for the charity ahead of supply of donations? Okay, I see what you mean. So is it that you're doing this because there's a need that needs to be met? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I've seen this work from both sides. So the childhood trust example, there was a clear need there, wasn't there, demonstrated, and that drove the donations. Whereas Kennel Club Charitable Trust was different, really. We were looking at kind of launching a relatively new charity in terms of its public face, and it was a more general appeal, wasn't it? It wasn't met by a sudden influx in something that was happening like Ukraine or what have you. I think it can work both ways.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It kind of depends on those goals. If you want something that just kind of tells people, here we are, then a brand awareness campaign is absolutely perfect. Whereas if you want something to say, we need money right now, then there's the more hard-hitting case study-led stuff as well.
Yeah. Okay, another question here. Do you have any advice for charities that work with vulnerable adults, brackets people with dementia, about how to sensitively and appropriately ask families to use their personal stories and case studies with the press? So really, really interesting one. We see this a lot because we all know that whether you're doing it in the media or whether you're doing a closed campaign, those case studies are critical, aren't they? One of my clients at the minute has a very similar message, not quite the same, but similar with vulnerable people. And we're simply anonymizing them. So yes, if you can get somebody to stand up and say, hey, I'm Amy, this happened to me, this charity changed my life, fantastic. But you can still use anonymized versions to make it work. Have you guys had examples of that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's, from press to broadcast, like you can still use like the faded out faces and everything like that. Outlets are still happy to do that. I think national news at the moment would rather have a case study and have to blur a face than not have a case study at all. So it's, case studies are always amazing if we can get them, but obviously the more vulnerable a story you're telling, the harder it is to help those case studies come forward. But any interviews that a case study does will have one of us or our media trainer or even a journalist and handler alongside to say that, like, to make it as comfortable as possible. I think that with vulnerable case studies as well, we always push for pre-records on broadcast media, because no one wants to be uncomfortable and then have to do a live interview on TV and radio, because it's just not fair. So pre-records for anyone that doesn't know is yeah, if you stumble on an answer or you get anything wrong, you want to retract something, you just do it, you repeat the conversation. It's just a much more chilled interview. So yeah, we'd always go that side as well.
Yeah. And I think it's about trust. You know, we talk a lot in fundraising about trust. So if there are, you know, beneficiaries of your organization who you think they would be a great, you know, case study, they need to trust you first. You know, just going to them as somebody you've never, you know, liaised with them before and saying, hey, you've got a great story, can we use it in the press? You know, build that relationship with them first. And as Sam said, people need to feel comfortable. So but yeah, happy to have an offline conversation about that if you need any further guidance on that question.
And,
any more?
On that subject of trust as well, we'd only pitch a vulnerable case study to a journalist we trust as well. It wouldn't be trying someone new at the Telegraph that day. It would be the person we always go to with that, and we'd have the existing relationship. We know that they can handle it really nicely. We know there's not going to be any red flags.
Brilliant. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions coming in at this time. Here's our contact details, myself and Sam and Frankie. If anything crops up, get in touch and we'll be happy to pick those up. This is recorded and will go on our website. It's the same as all of our webinars. But guys, thank you so much. That was really insightful. You know, it's something I'm learning about all the time, kind of navigating the nuances of charity and media. So really helpful. Hopefully everyone else thought that was helpful as well, but thank you so much for joining us. We'll let you get on with your day and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
There's Amy. Thanks all.
Amy, bye.